Good morning, everyone. As I said at the outset, you're very welcome to the State of Ireland launch for 2020. The State of Ireland this year is entitled Engineering a Green and Digital Future, and we're really delighted to welcome over 300 people who have registered for this event today. My name is Caroline Spillane and I'm the Director General of Engineers Ireland. So on Tuesday of this week, Ministers Donoghue and McGrath laid out a significant challenge facing our country and the magnitude of the solutions required to meet that challenge. They did this in Budget 2021, which included a very welcome increase in capital investment to more than 10 billion euro. The budget also outlined a 3.4 billion euro recovery fund, as well as a review of the National Development Plan. Meanwhile, the Climate Action and Low Carbon Development Bill published last week will legislate for carbon neutrality in the economy by 2050. And we see the role of the engineering profession as helping to ensure value for money, quality and rapidly delivered capital projects and critical utilities. And as the professional body for more than 25,000 engineers, Engineers Ireland would like to assist national recovery by offering expertise in infrastructure, technology, and skills to the implementation of the Programme for Government, the National Development Plan Review, and building a carbon neutral economy. We are publishing proposals in this report today. The State of Ireland 2020 is the 10th annual instalment of our series of reports which examine the state of critical sectors of our country's built environment. The report is informed by a dedicated advisory group of engineers and other professionals, many of whom are joining us online today. And I'd really like to thank all of those who took part and gave their time and expertise over the last number of months. I'd also like to thank Maurice Buckley, our president, who chaired the advisory group, and Dr. Richard Manton, our Deputy Registrar and Policy Officer, who coordinated the project. This morning, Maurice will summarise the findings of the report, and he will be joined by our guest panellists, who are Fergus Kane from EY, Conall Boland from RPS, and a member of the Engineers Ireland Executive Board, and Dr. Declan Deasy, a digital strategy advisor. Once we've heard from each of the panellists, we will have an opportunity for Q&As. So if you have questions, please use the Q&A function, and we'll be outlining that in more detail. And as we're going down through the presentation on the report, if you can bear in mind perhaps questions that you'd like to put to any of the panelists and to the President. But before I hand over to the President, I'd like to read a short biography. So Maurice Buckley is the President of Engineers Ireland and recently delivered his presidential address on engineering in a changing world, COVID-19, Brexit and beyond. He's also the Executive Chairman of the Office of Public Works, leading large-scale capital investments and maintenance programmes to improve Ireland's flood defences and public buildings, both modern and heritage. He was previously the CEO of the National Standards Authority of Ireland and has held a number of senior positions in the manufacturing, consultancy and print sectors. Maurice is a chartered engineer, a chartered director, a fellow of Engineers Ireland and a graduate of electrical engineering from University College Dublin. Maurice.
Thank you, Caroline, and good morning to all the attendees, members of Engineers Ireland, colleagues and friends. As President of Engineers Ireland, I am absolutely delighted to launch our State of Ireland 2020 report on engineering a green and digital recovery. My role today is a brief overview of the report before we move into the panel discussion. So the challenges we face as a country require very little introduction. The COVID-19 pandemic has not only revealed the vulnerability of our social and healthcare systems, but it's highlighted the myriad of economic and environmental challenges that we face. But the pandemic has also demonstrated the agility of the nation to engineer dramatic improvements for the good of society, including innovation in healthcare, technology, and the built environment. And we're only just starting. In the State of Ireland 2020, we set out recommendations that we believe will help the Irish economy to recover by reduce human impact on the environment and also to the quality of life. Infrastructure and technology are core elements of a modern society and economy. They strengthen economic growth through job creation and enhancing efficiency, productivity, and competitiveness. Correctly targeted investment in infrastructure and technology will underpin social cohesion by providing vital facilities for citizens, such as public transport and broadband communications. As Caroline mentioned, the State of Ireland 2020 is the 10th in this series, where we've examined the critical sectors of the country's infrastructure and technology. Previous editions of the report looked at housing, water, flooding, transport, communications, and energy. This year's edition of the report is quite different from the preceding 9 editions, and that's deliberately so. It seeks to support national recovery efforts in the wake of COVID-19 and the realisation of the ambitious programme for government and national development plan, and to respond to the imminent Brexit situation. The report places these short-term issues in the longer-term context of climate action and digitalisation, drawing on European policy and advocating for a green and digital recovery. Balancing the economic imperative and management challenge of delivering high-quality infrastructure quickly and cost-effectively with environmental and sustainability considerations requires a range of specialist skills. This expertise is available within Engineers Ireland and the network of governmental and professional bodies with whom we work. This report is a call to action to the engineering profession as much as it is to government. If the government can provide the financial and policy means, we are undertaking that our profession can make this happen. To develop the State of Ireland report, we convened an advisory group of engineers and other professionals from public and private sector. These invited experts deliberated and contributed to the report via video conferencing and emails over several months now. The logos of their organisation are shown on the slide, and you'll find their names listed in the report itself. It was my pleasure, and it was a pleasure, to chair such a good advisory group, and I really would like to thank all of the group members for their hard work and excellent contributions. So the State of Ireland 2020 report is structured in 4 interrelated sections: infrastructure for economic stimulus, a Green New Deal for Ireland, a digital Ireland, and finally educating for a green and digital future. So I want to just touch on each of those briefly. First of all, capital investment, infrastructure for economic stimulus. Capital investment fell dramatically during the last recession, and we have previously reported on the ongoing deficits in many sectors, including housing, health, transport, energy, water, and waste. Beyond the clear economic, social, and economic benefits, investment in productive infrastructure acts as an excellent economic stimulus and creates much needed jobs in the construction sector. Work by EY, which Fergal will tell us a little bit more about in the panel discussion, I'm sure, has shown the very positive impact that spending on infrastructure has on overall employment. Each direct job in the sector creates 2 or more across the economy. Each new maintenance job has been found to create 3.5 more indirect jobs. So while public investment in infrastructure is important in its own right as a driver of economic activity, it also has an enabling impact on other policy areas and on private sector capital investment. Capital investments are needed now to stimulate economic recovery, linked to achieving more medium-term strategic policy goals, such as climate action and regional development. 2 days ago, in Budget 2021, increased capital spending of more than 10 billion was announced. This is the first time we've hit that level. This is a very welcome boost for our economy and our profession, and Engineers Ireland would like to see this level of ambition actually extended. We support IBEC's call for an overall capital spending increase of €25 billion across the lifetime of the National Development Plan. This investment should be targeted at decarbonisation and aligned very much to the national planning framework and regionalisation. Legislative reforms in planning will be needed to enable effective project delivery. And we're highlighting a number of pieces of legislation to improve planning and project delivery, such as the Marine Planning and Development Management Bill, the Water Environment Abstractions Bill, and the Housing Planning and Development Bill, all of which are at advanced stages going through the Parliament, the Dáil at the moment. We're also saying that procurement could be immediately improved by increasing the threshold for open tendering from €50,000 to €250,000. Finally, we need to ensure that critical state and semi-state bodies are sufficiently resourced and aligned to deliver the expanded capital programme. So moving on, the European Green Deal is the plan to make Europe carbon neutral by 2050, boosting the economy through green technology, creating sustainable industry and transport, and cutting pollution. A Green New Deal for Ireland would be based on accelerating greenhouse gas emission reductions, enacting the recently published Climate Action Bill, which targets net zero emissions by 2050, and seeking funds to support this through the European Green Deal. So while we face major challenges in decarbonising heat and transport, we have actually made huge progress in the electricity sector. Ireland is now #1 in the world for onshore wind share of electricity, and we are on track to meet the 40% renewable electricity target for 2020. Now, achieving 70% renewable electricity by 2030 will require us to double onshore wind to more than 8 gigabytes, build 3.5 gigabytes of offshore wind, and roughly 1.5 gigawatts of solar. Gigabytes, I'm obsessed with digital. Gigawatts I'm talking about, of course. The development of offshore wind has the potential to be a game changer in reducing Ireland's carbon emissions, but we will need to identify a port that can be used to support this industry if we're to take full advantage of the opportunities on offer. A port to support offshore wind needs to have a particularly good port depth, water depth, long key lengths because of the size of the turbines, and storage space nearby. If not identified soon, it is likely that the first new offshore wind farms will be built from ports outside this jurisdiction. Through energy system integration, we can ensure that the delivery of low carbon, reliable and resource efficient energy system is done at the least possible cost for society. This should include, for example, the electrification of end-use sectors such as heat and transport to the greatest degree possible, and a hydrogen strategy for Ireland. Ireland's electric grid will need new system services, capacity and interconnectors to be developed to support further renewable electricity integration and electrified heat and transport. I can't do justice here to all of our proposed Green New Deal for Ireland in this short presentation. We include recommendations on a radical national retrofit strategy, re-engineering of our transport system, active state land management and multi-annual funding for water, wastewater and flood risk management. We believe that communities must be at the very heart of green recovery by involving local citizens as early as possible and as much as possible in the development of new infrastructure and ensuring that local communities benefit directly from it. In the third section of the report, we put forward what we call a digital Ireland. So digitalisation is transforming how and where we live, work and learn. We all know COVID-19 has accelerated this digital trend hugely. Just look at the technology that we're using for today's launch of this report. In the report, we profile the work of Nearform, an Irish software engineering company that built the COVID-19 contact tracing app for the HSE in just 3 months. And Nearform software is now being used for similar apps in several US states. COVID-19 has also highlighted the potential for technology-enabled remote working, while at the same time, the exasperating digital divide.
So I might just say a few words in Maurice's stead, and hopefully Maurice will be able to step back in. So I think Maurice was in the middle of introducing our third chapter on digitalisation. And Maurice, if you do get signal back, please feel free to jump back in. That if maybe I could preempt what Maurice was going to describe in the report, we take on the trend of digitalisation, which of course is transforming the way we are all working, many of us working remotely, as well as how we learn in terms of the our education system at third level, primary and secondary. That Engineers Ireland believes this digitalisation should be placed at the very centre of our national recovery, and that we can also use it to tackle climate change and help to deliver a better quality of life, social well-being, new jobs and sustainable economic growth. Therefore, we are calling for a national programme for digital transformation to set out a vision for an equitable, secure and sustainable transition to a digital society fueled by data, which we term the reusable raw material of the 21st century. That this will require digital infrastructure, such as the rollout of broadband and 5G, reinforced cybersecurity, a digital first public sector, and we also call for an all-island data economy, which could be based on a post-Brexit common data space, a connected network of digital enterprise hubs, and the continued expansion of an Industry 4.0 ready and sustainable manufacturing base. In all of our recommendations, we believe that education will be pivotal to this green and digital future that we are setting out. That the World Economic Forum has called for a reskilling imperative, which would mean that more people would be equipped with digital skills, sustainability skills, and human skills, such as critical thinking and management. That this very much calls for a culture of lifelong learning, with professional bodies such as Engineers Ireland can lead on through our continuing professional development programs and other courses. That new ways of learning, such as professional engineering apprenticeships, do indicate a future path to fill skills needs in our profession. That in the report, we profile one of these apprenticeships, that is the Bachelor of Engineering in Industrial Engineering at Limerick Institute of Technology. And that was the first of its kind to be accredited by Engineers Ireland. So on the slide, you'll see some of those graduates. And like in infrastructure and technology, that education and skills require investment to be fit for the future. That our higher education system, for example, needs a sustainable funding model to respond to the current challenges we face and to prepare for longer term transitions. There should also be investment in lifelong learning, in expanded skill nets, and in apprenticeships. Finally, we are calling for a nationwide digital literacy programme, which could be launched to combat disinformation, to foster the uptake of digital technologies, to raise awareness of the abuse of personal data, and to counteract the socioeconomic and geographical digital divides, which have been exacerbated by COVID-19 and may have even impacted on our own event here today. So to conclude and to apologise, I believe Maurice experienced a power cut. That in conclusion, on behalf of Engineers Ireland, that the State of Ireland report advocates for Ireland's recovery to be green and digital, and that will be driven by investments in infrastructure, technology and education. So thank you for your attention, and I look forward to responding to some of your questions in the Q&A. So I'll hand you back to Caroline.
Thanks very much, Richard. And as Richard said there, yes, Maurice, it was less of a digital issue and more of a power energy issue. So he's hoping to rejoin us shortly. So thank you, Richard. And I think just at this point, we have quite a number of people who have joined us on the broadcast, and that's really fantastic. And I had mentioned at the outset that we do have a Q&A function. So if you look at the bottom bar, you'll see that Q&A is marked there. And if you want to, as we go down through the panelists now, you want to think about questions that you might like to pose to each one of the panelists. So as Richard and Maurice had outlined there, you know, we've covered a lot of the recommendations around how investment in infrastructure can be a driver of economic activity and obviously has a hugely enabling impact. The idea of a Green Deal for Ireland and importantly, how communities must be involved and at the heart of any new Green Deal approach. And as Richard finished there, the idea of education and how we really need to ensure that we have sustainable funding for our higher level education sector and digital literacy. So some of those items, and I'm sure many others, will be taken up by our panel members. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to introduce each one of the panel members in turn. They're going to speak for a few moments. And so we're delighted to be joined by Ferga Kane. Ferga is a partner in EY's strategy and transaction team, which focuses on government and infrastructure. She has extensive experience in advising public and private sector clients on the development and financing of large-scale infrastructure projects across a wide range of sectors. Ferga also advises on complex financial modelling and developments and review assignments for public sector, private sector, and the banking sector. With substantial experience in professional services in Ireland, Ferga joined EY as a director and she became a partner in 2019. She graduated from University College Dublin with a degree in commerce and went on to gain further qualifications from the UCD Michael Smurfit Business School and the Said Business School at the University of Oxford. So I'll ask Ferga to take over now. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. And good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here this morning and participate on this morning's panel, and just like to say thank you to Engineers Ireland for extending the invitation to me. The timing of the publication of the State of Ireland 2020 report is so apt, hot on the heels of Government's Budget 2021 and the publication of Government's plans to stabilise and stimulate the Irish economy during this time of such unprecedented uncertainty and hardship for so many. As referenced in the report and by Maurice in his presentation, myself and my colleague Shane McSweeney published an article earlier this year which we titled Repairing the Damage from COVID-19. The essence of our article is that infrastructure spending can help economies return to full strength after times of recession and great difficulties, an argument which is repeated and expanded upon in the State of Ireland 2020 report. At the time of writing our article, the shape of our new government was being formed and rescue packages and stimulus spending was being announced. Those measures focused on paying people's wages, supporting the most vulnerable and keeping businesses afloat. They were and they continue to be important priorities in the immediate term. But what about the long term? That is where investment in new infrastructure can have such a significant impact. This argument isn't new. We have seen that such investment boosts both short-term demand and long-term productivity. Indeed, in 2014, the IMF published a study which indicated that an increase in capital spending of 1% of GDP leads to a 0.4% uplift in output that very same year, and a further 1.5% rise 4 years later. This economic dividend occurs because building new infrastructure lays the groundwork for future economic growth. As we've seen all over the world, and also here in Ireland, the availability of reliable underlying infrastructure boosts productive capacity and enable sustained economic activity. Two key pillars to rebuild our recently damaged economy. In our article, we considered what the new government should do with regards to infrastructure spending, and we framed this across three distinct timeframes: now, next, and beyond. Now, which was actually during the early summer, we proposed the government had to remain committed to existing spending plans, as turning off construction activity altogether can significantly impact the economy. Our analysis showed that across all countries examined, the estimated impact of stopping construction activity would have significant economic costs, given the linkages between construction activity and the modern economy, and the sheer scale of the number of workers involved. Next, which we consider to be the 6 to 12 months following the initial phasing out of lockdown restrictions. We proposed that infrastructure could have a significant role and focus should be on incremental spend. Given the time taken to plan and develop typical large-scale projects, we proposed that small is beautiful. Smaller projects such as maintenance, minor repairs and asset improvement should be the order of the day. Typically, government departments and public sector agencies have a list of these ready to go, given that they don't often get to these projects. The benefit of these projects is that the size of the project attracts small and medium-sized contractors which are locally based, directing economic benefit where it is most needed in these times of hardship. From colleagues in Australia, we were able to show data that indicated every direct job in the construction sector created 2 or more jobs across the wider economy, with maintenance projects increasing this multiplier to 3.5 jobs across the wider economy. We identified projects such as smaller scale projects in the retrofitting programme in the Climate Action Plan as being a good example of projects that could be used to this good effect. And then looking to beyond, to the long term. This is where large-scale infrastructure projects can be a central pillar to the long-term stimulus approach. But as said already, they must be new initiatives that weren't already committed. So spending under the National Development Plan should continue with additional investment on top. These types of projects, even with the best will in the world, as we all know, can take time to identify, plan and procure. So we proposed in our article that the government should get working on them in parallel with the short-term spending on the smaller projects, so as to result in a continuous pipeline and wave of infrastructure projects boosting and sustaining our economy. As outlined by Maurice in his presentation, the State of Ireland Report 2020 identifies that investment in infrastructure acts as an excellent economic stimulus and creates much needed jobs in the construction sector. The report's 4 recommendations in this area: increased capital spending, enactment of those key pieces of legislation, focus on capacity to deliver and increased procurement thresholds, all are proposed to support the delivery of further infrastructure investment and in turn, economic growth and job creation. Given the proposals in both our pieces of writing, it was very positive to see the government's ongoing commitment to infrastructure investment in Tuesday's budget, and indeed to see the increase in the level of capital spending to just over 10 billion, the first of its time. It is clear that the government of today has learned from the lessons of the past, and that the deficit of infrastructure spending in Ireland after the global financial crisis won't be repeated. In addition, the €3.4 billion recovery fund will focus on infrastructure development, reskill and retraining, and supporting investment and jobs, appears to respond to many of the themes outlined in our 2 papers. I look forward to further information from government on this and the review of the National Development Plan, and hope it's going to be an exciting and rewarding time for infrastructure in Ireland. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ferga. And now I'd like to call on Conall Boland. Conall is a senior consultant in sustainability and planning at RPS and a member of the Engineers Ireland Executive Board. Conall was a board member and the deputy chairperson of On Board Planola for 12 years, where he led the Strategic Infrastructure Division charged with decision-making on major infrastructure projects in Ireland, including energy, transport, healthcare and waste. Conall also lectures in sustainable development in Technology University Dublin, and he is a chartered engineer and a graduate of civil and environmental engineering at Trinity College Dublin. Conall holds a master's degree in civil engineering and in spatial planning, and he was a member of the State of Ireland Advisory Group. Conall?
Thanks very much, Caroline. Delighted to be here for the launch. A lot of the content of the report, we advise other parts of government and other parts of society, maybe what they should do to launch on the green and digital recovery. But we also, as a profession, need to look at what we're doing ourselves and to challenge ourselves. Are we providing enough creativity and innovation to drive forward this recovery ourselves? So Engineers Ireland has just launched a new sustainability framework that sets the direction for the profession in terms of implementing the UN Sustainable Development Goals. It's built around 4 themes, around learn, live, lead, and link. And for example, under the learning theme, the regions and the sectoral societies are generating programs for the coming year that will include sustainability, recovery, and innovation around energy efficiency, transport, and sustainable development. So it's an opportunity. If you haven't read that document, please do, and get on board with those continuous professional development initiatives that are coming in the months ahead, and bring forward your own ideas and suggestions. Fergus mentioned the extent of investment that's proposed in the budget and in the National Development Plan overall. So there's multi-billion euro programs ahead of us, and we owe it to ourselves as a country to deliver that infrastructure as efficiently as possible. And if we look at our current system, the report that we're launching today says there is room for improvement, and we point out areas where legislation can be updated in relation to both planning and procurement to make that system more efficient. Delays in delivering infrastructure don't just cost the individual project, but they hold up the benefits, and they interfere with achieving the benefits from the infrastructure will deliver itself. So one of the things we need is joined up thinking among government bodies and departments. So if a project is a priority in the National Development Plan, all elements of the government should be behind it and should work together to make sure that it comes to the planning stage with an agreed position, and that all departments are behind that. Turning to the planning system, the strategic infrastructure process has been in place for almost 15 years now. And while it has delivered, it's fair to say there is room for improvement, and that was the view across the panel that drew up the report. And what we did is we looked at the strategic housing development legislation and system that was brought in 3 years ago to address the housing crisis. And the performance of An Bord Pleanála and the results emerging from strategic housing are quite impressive. In the 2019 annual report from An Bord Pleanála, they highlight the fact that 82 housing cases were decided, all within the 16-week timeframe, and delivering 16,600 residential units. So the recommendation in our report today is that we look to re-energise the strategic infrastructure development system and to bring across some of the lessons learned from the housing initiative. And the 3 strands we pick up on are a need for a strong political focus on efficiency and reform, increased resourcing of An Bord Pleanála to deliver on efficiency, and better use of online technology to enable public engagement. One of the themes that Maurice mentioned in his introduction was some of the positives that came out that are coming out of the COVID crisis. So there have been some success stories in relation to health and other sectors. And I just draw attention to the agile response of several local authorities around the country. So we've seen schemes to improve the public realm, schemes to bring in pedestrianisation, building of new cycleways, and a strong emphasis on active transport and travel. And of course, we're appreciating more strongly the link between health and well-being and active travel through walking, cycling, and so on. So the investment in green infrastructure has been welcome, but has been delivered very quickly. So if that keyword is agility, the challenge to us now is, can we capture some of that momentum and agility and continue to invest in these kind of systems? The risk is that in a year or two, we slip back into our preset conditions, maybe congestion, long commutes, Or do we turn over a new leaf and look to embed more smarter travel, green transport solutions, telecommuting, and so on? So that agility is something that we want to focus on in the report, and it's one of the themes of today's presentation. In the report, I suppose the chapters on the green recovery and digital recovery are separate, but there are some good examples in the document of where green and digital are converging. For example, we highlight the National Smart Metering Programme by ESB Networks. That's an investment of 1.2 billion. It's already underway and will continue for the next 6 years. And what the Smart Metering Programme will enable is smarter energy management across the country, support EV charging of vehicles, enable excess solar energy from PV panels to be fed onto the grid. It'll give the option for off-peak tariffs so that we use energy more sensibly at off-peak times. And all of this will help reduce carbon emissions and reduce the need for physical upgrades of infrastructure. So a similar opportunity is there in the transport sector if we look at the smarter travel opportunities and using big data and software apps to connect up public transport with bike share schemes, car share schemes, and make it viable to live in cities and towns without private car ownership, or to reduce the rates of car ownership. So the green and digital can combine together. And one other section I'd like to highlight in the report is about the challenge and opportunity of energy system integration. So up to now, we've maybe regarded the electricity system as standalone from the gas system, as standalone from biomass or heating systems. And the next wave of development in energy is about energy integration and making those systems communicate better, share resources, and implement a more circular economy approach. And I think that's an element of the report that's really well put together, and I advise you to turn to that. So thanks for your attention, and I'll hand it back to you, Caroline.
Thank you very much, Conall. And I just want to remind people at this point that you can use the Q&A function, and I've had a look at some of the questions that are coming in. Some fantastic questions to put to our panelists have already been lodged with us. So just to bear in mind that function there and to get questions in. So the last of the panelists is Dr. Declan Deasy. Declan is a digital strategy advisor working on national administration, international organizations, the European Commission and the World Bank on regional and national data strategies, public sector digital transformation, and data-driven administration. He joined the European Commission in 1978. He retired in 2012 as Director of Information Systems and Interoperability Solutions at the Director General for Informatics. Declan is a member of Engineers Ireland and has a first-class honours degree in engineering and a PhD in computer science from Trinity College Dublin, where he was a lecturer before he joined the European Commission. More recently, he was a member of the team that produced the European Commission's digital strategy. Declan was a member of the State of Ireland Advisory Group. So Declan, over to you.
Thanks, Caroline, and good morning, everybody. I am very pleased to participate in this panel and in the launch of this Engineering Ireland report on a green and digital future for Ireland. As Maurice and Richard both emphasised, digital transformation is fundamentally changing our society, economy, and industries. And this is something that has been recognised at a political level, globally, and policymakers and politicians working on how to integrate digitalisation into policies for jobs, growth, services. That was the context 9 months ago. And then out of nowhere, COVID came, which completely accelerated these societal changes with increased remote working, online interaction, and online shopping, and exacerbating digital divides. So the result is that today we have these political preoccupations are now the reality. One, physical footfall has been replaced by digital footprint. Two, digital landscape has changed dramatically. And three, remote working needs high-speed connectivity now. And today's report attempts to make recommendations on how to address these issues in the general context of how to prepare for a recovery and a sustainable Ireland with green and digital dimensions. The recovery will be both green and digital. Digital enables green, as Conall pointed out. And both of these pillars are mutually reinforcing, but they will only achieve their objectives if there is sustained, ring-fenced investments in the area of infrastructure, technology, and education, particularly along the lines that Fergus has outlined in terms of immediate, next, and beyond long-term investments. So the report says that given this fundamental challenge, the response has to be commensurate. And the response should really be a government-led national programme for digital transformation, setting out a vision with well-defined outcomes, associated ring-fenced investment to ensure the transition to a resilient, equitable society. The report identifies recommendations around investments, around accelerated broadband, both across the country so that the geographical digital divide is addressed, and 5G is identified as a strategic investment that should be prepared for. Local digital enterprise hubs to support SMEs. Industrial 4.0 with cyber physical systems should be the priority. Increase cybersecurity, particularly for state infrastructure and information assets and accelerate the modernization of the public sector. We've seen examples of that lately. We know what can be done, and that should become a priority. Digital first, collaborative working practices, interoperability, sharing, and reuse of data. And given the necessity to address post-Brexit issues, we should legislate for, the recommendation is to legislate for an all-Ireland common data space post-Brexit to ensure free flow of data across the island of Ireland and underpin the digital data economy. And finally, education is key, and that's why the 4th chapter of the report emphasizes the need for capacity building in digital skills and also digital literacy programs to ensure that there's opportunities for employment and for tackling the digital divide. The only possibility to achieve these objectives is with a government-led subcommittee spearheaded by the Minister for Enterprise, Trade and Employment and the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform, in collaboration with all stakeholders, with a mandate to deliver Digital Ireland around resilient infrastructure and ecosystems, around a public administration fit for the 21st century, and around the modernisation and digitalisation of the industrial sector and SMEs. And in that context, there is a role for Engineers Ireland. As Maurice emphasised, it's in fact, this report is a call for action for the design, development, delivery and deployment of user-centric solutions across infrastructure, technologies, systems and services. And funding is available, not only from Tuesday's budget, but also at a European level, where the multi-annual financial framework has been supplemented with a specific recovery and resilience facility, Next Generation EU, which has dedicated to digital and green transition. And for the digital transition, it has allocated 135 billion for digital transformation projects, so that the objective of the Commission's President, Ursula von der Leyen, making this decade a digital decade, can be achieved. And that's the source of funding which will allow Ireland's success stories. Those companies, manufacturing companies, service companies, local government, like what Conall made reference to, SMEs and civic communities, to avail of these funds. And those who invest in data, those who invest in cyber physical systems and in digital services, those who invest in cybersecurity, and those who invest in staff and skills to leverage the maximum value across these three domains. These are the companies that will drive the recovery and will be tomorrow's success stories. So the report includes much more detailed recommendations that can be followed up by individuals in their daily work. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Declan, and to all of our panelists. We'll move into the Q&A session now. My name is Richard Manton, the Deputy Registrar and Policy Officer at Engineers Ireland. So thank you to our attendees who have posted quite a lot of questions, some very interesting questions in there. Fergus, if I could come to you first. We have a question from Martin McKee, who asks, Fergus, you described findings from the IMF and listed the numerous benefits for a national economy from infrastructure investment during recessions. Is there evidence and/or, in your view, does this translate directly to, for example, semi-state bodies in Ireland, like our airports or ports? There will be a temptation in these bodies to fear investment as a risk when their income is reduced and they're not directly funded by government.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, so the data has shown that those, I suppose the jobs benefit applies right across the economy, regardless of the entity or the type of entity. And also evidence has shown, which I didn't comment in my few minutes, but is outlined in our report, that actually when countries invest in the infrastructure stock, it has been seen that that does attract further private investment. I suppose money follows money. So those projects, that may benefit from private investment and I suppose private scrutiny, maybe some of these other entities which aren't directly funded by government can benefit by that attraction of private investment. So, we would hope, and from working with some of these public sector or semi-state agencies over the last number of months, that although they are hurting from the impact of COVID, they do see the benefit of that longer term view with regards to investment.
Okay, thank you, Fergus. We've received a couple of questions related to ports. So Maurice, thank you for rejoining us. I might bring you in on a couple of these questions. So for example, Brian Gordon asks, could a purpose-built port be erected at a site like Moneypoint as it reaches end of life with the mandated closure in 2024? Surely the transmission here could be retrofitted to facilitate such a project and would provide employment in this low employment area. Sorry, and we also have a question from David Kennery. The port for offshore wind is an excellent pragmatic project that merits immediate exploration. What would the rough capital expenditure be and what financing options could work? And is Cork Harbour the best location for a facility?
Thanks, Richard. And first of all, apologies to everybody for losing connection there. It's almost as though it was planned for the Engineers Ireland launch today. The electricity, where I live in Roscommon, failed in the whole town. It's still out. So it shows that, well, things are good and we can remote work. We still need more investment and more technology, more reliable technology, and Engineers Ireland to deliver that. But I'm back on battery power, so that's great. Richard, to those questions, yeah, the offshore gas industry is huge, and offshore wind, and to invest in offshore wind is hugely beneficial in itself. But if we can tackle provision of the sites where the pieces are prepared and put together and then brought to the actual end site, and then where the manufacturing is done, obviously Ireland will benefit much more from the whole industry, and we are a perfect site in Europe. So that's where this idea comes, and the recommendation of designating one port to support the industry, in the same way as Aberdeen and Norfolk in the UK support the oil industry. So where could that port be? Well, you know, there are several candidates. Cork certainly has a strong interest and has put itself forward as having some of the criteria needed. You need deep water, you need a very long quay line, and you need space near the port where all the storage and all the manufacturing can take place at a short distance. Rosslare has expressed an interest. And yes, maybe going as far over as Foynes and Moneypoint, there may be possibilities there. What that would cost, I really don't know, but there is a lot of investment taking place at the moment related to Brexit. And maybe this is something we could consider tagging on to that once we get through the initial Brexit crisis.
Thanks for that, Maurice. Conall, if I could pose this question to you. This comes in from John McGowan. So John says that the planned government investment is very welcome, but the COVID pandemic has signalled that significant social changes might be in train, from living space for healthy living to working from home. So Conall, how can the likelihood of these trends be assessed and possibly incorporated in infrastructure investment priorities?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I suppose one of the themes that we picked up on in the report is just how critical the broadband capacity is around the country, and it has enabled us. The infrastructure we have has enabled the economy to keep moving, and particularly the engineering profession to keep moving effectively. People working from home, and we haven't lost that much momentum. But there are certain pockets of the country in certain areas where, you know, to be competitive in business and to work effectively from home still isn't possible. So, if anything, just the acceleration of that investment in telecommunications has been highlighted. But that's opening up new opportunities then for maybe reduced commuting, maybe decarbonizing societies in other ways. So I think companies like EY, companies like ourselves, are beginning to look at what the impacts of COVID have been, but it's not clear yet really how that shapes our infrastructure investment. I think we still are going to need investment in things like public transport. Public transport has taken a hit. We even had the National Transport Authority advising people not to use public transport over the last year. But when things get back to fully operational cities and towns and economies, the big challenge in terms of the green recovery is moving away from heavily private car transport dependency. So investment in projects like your metro, your Dart Underground, your light rail, that has a benefit not just for the short term, but that goes decades into the future. So we still need to continue to invest in that long-term infrastructure and the long-term benefits that flow from that.
Okay, thanks, Conall. Declan, I have a question for you on broadband. This comes in from John Coleman, who asks, it is becoming evident more than ever that good quality broadband is essential for all aspects of life in Ireland, including education and business. Is there any way that the quality of the system can be improved quickly in remote areas? Would it be worthwhile to provide free broadband to everybody in Ireland?
Well, there are initiatives to provide free Wi-Fi for local areas. There's a European program, Wi-Fi for all, but for the government it is part of the rollout of broadband. I think it's a very valid question. It's up to politicians to decide where the priority is for their investments. But from what Conall has just said, it's very, very clear. If you want to have regional development, if you want to allow people to remote live and work where they live, and it requires, for tomorrow's world, high-speed broadband for all. And that requires acceleration of the existing plans and maybe increased investment for those areas that have poor coverage at the moment.
Thank you, Declan. We've received a couple of questions on education, which I might attempt to answer myself. Barry Doherty says that the key to delivering all of the ambitions set out in the report is education. How do we educate the workforce of the future? How do we equip our young people with the necessary skills, in particular human skills, such as critical thinking, creativity, communication, to enable them to deliver a green and digital recovery? We also received a question about Engineers Ireland's own accreditation programme. So I might just briefly mention that Engineers Ireland accredits over 200 engineering degrees across Ireland. Our accreditation programme examines not only the technical skills such as problem solving and design, but also the transversal skills such as communication and teamwork. I do think the report sets out very clearly that how these skills will need to be digital, sustainable and human. I do think as well it's a call to action for students to consider studying an engineering degree, to check out the Engineers Ireland website to see the courses we accredit, but also our CPD programme, which includes both short courses and slightly longer courses like our CPD diploma. So I would encourage any students to check those out. In terms of our accreditation programme, we are revising our criteria to increase the level of coverage given to both digital skills and sustainable skills, as well as in the report we make several recommendations, for example, for a national programme of digital literacy. So I do think that education has a very fundamental role to play here. So Fergus, if I could come back to you on one more question. Apologies. So Patrick Donnellan asks in relation to value for money, that have there been any recommendations made to government in relation to getting value for money? How can public money, the vast majority of which is borrowed, be protected from price gouging so that we can ensure that we don't see a repeat of the out of control spending as witnessed on recent high profile projects?
Well, I think with regards to value for money and obviously trying to increase infrastructure projects, you know, proper assessment still needs to be done. We can do agile delivery and we can accelerate procurement and delivery, but fundamentally government needs to still consider and ensure the underlying need for each project. So, you know, when looking at those projects which can get added or reprioritized, we still need to ensure that there is, you know, the need for that project and that value for money can be achieved. So yes, we are focusing on accelerated delivery, but not to the expense of, you know, good feasibility assessment.
Okay, thank you, Fergus. I'm conscious that we've now reached 10 o'clock, so I would like to move into the closing section of the event. I'd like to ask each of our speakers to just give some closing remarks in 2 minutes or so, and I'll just go in opposite order to the start of the event. So Declan, if I could come to you first for any closing remarks.
Thanks very much, Richard. So I think the questions have brought home the fact that the report is timely, and most importantly of all, that some of the recommendations require action today. We are facing unprecedented, urgent challenges that have been emphasized by all the speakers: COVID-19, Brexit, climate change, digitalisation. And that demands a response over and beyond the norm. And for me, it requires a T.K. Whitaker moment. The Programme for Economic Expansion 60 years ago was a catalyst for the modernisation of Irish society, Irish industry and public services. That's what's required today. And the Engineers Ireland report contributes to that, because without a government-led national programme with public ring-fenced investment, we are not going to achieve the economic recovery, and we're not going to support the twin green and digital transitions, which is the only way to prepare a future for the country. And that requires a buy-in of all stakeholders, public and private sector, and civic society and academia. And it's a particularly important role for Engineers Ireland. As Maurice mentioned, it's a call for action. For me, it's quite simple. The mission should be create what never was, a green and digital Ireland.
That's great. Thank you, Declan. If I could come to you, Conall.
Thanks, Richard. I think that's a really positive note to end on, and I'd like to continue the positivity. Sometimes we sit and we moan that we don't have the budgets to deliver the infrastructure we need to, but we don't have that complaint after yesterday's budget and the National Development Programme. So it's up to the engineering profession to roll up our sleeves and get behind the recovery and put our energy and efforts into it. So we need the attitude of yes, we can, as Féidir Linn. I think there's a massive energy challenge that we discussed, but we're already approaching 40% penetration of renewable electricity on our national grid, which is among the highest anywhere in the world. And within the next 10 years, we're going to take that to 70%. And that's going to take a lot of effort and a lot of investment, a lot of work. But that's really, really valuable engineering know-how we're developing. And that expertise is going to be valuable all around the world, not just in Ireland. So we can take a leaf from what Denmark did. They progressed into wind energy, they developed infrastructure and know-how. And 15, 20 years later, they're exporting that around the world. So we can take a leaf from that, and we can be exporting our engineering excellence in energy systems and grid management around the world. So I think that's another green and digital opportunity that we need to grasp. So I'll leave it at that.
That's great. Thank you. And over to you, Fergal.
Thanks, Richard. I mean, really, I'd agree with Conall and Declan. You know, we are at a time now with the opportunity for significant change. I think the building blocks have been put in place over the last number of years. The budget announced on Tuesday, you know, gives financial support, and really, you know, it is incumbent on all of us in all of our roles, in all of our professions, and even as citizens, you know, to support and really drive forward and take this opportunity out of the health crisis to really drive forward significant change. Thank you.
Thanks, Fergal. And finally, over to you, Maurice.
Yes, thanks, Richard. I just want to take the opportunity again to thank everybody who contributed to this report, all of our advisors, your good self, Richard, as the author-in-chief, and all of the engineering sectors in Engineers Ireland who interacted more closely with the report this year than in previous years. I do think it's a great report. I had less to do with it than anybody else of the advisory group in terms of content, but I do think it's a fabulous, coherent plan forward that brings together the various threads and the very positive investment that we're seeing in the key areas. It's not the end of the process. It's a big event today to publish this report, but it's the start externally in terms of how we will use this report now in Engineers Ireland to interact with government at all levels and to try and realise the recommendations and the ambitions contained. And also within Engineers Ireland, several speakers have said, and I endorse it fully, this is a call to action, not just to government and society, but first and foremost to ourselves in the engineering profession. And there are several initiatives running at the moment in parallel within Engineers Ireland, particularly through the sectors, our divisions, our regions, our societies. And it is a real opportunity, and really we all have to get involved in our own companies, individually, and through the medium of Engineers Ireland to make this happen and deliver that value for money that was mentioned in one of the questions. Thank you very much to everybody for participating, and again to all the panelists and the contributors to the report.
Thank you, Maurice. And I'd just like to close the event with a few words. But thank you again to our panelists, to everyone who participated in the report, and to all of our attendees. Unfortunately, we only got through less than half the questions, and we were delighted with the amount of interest in the event. But if you'd like to continue this discussion and to learn more about engineering and the green recovery, I'd really encourage you to register for our national conference, which is entitled Engineering Climate Action, Solutions to Combat Climate Change in Ireland. That the conference will take place as a fully virtual event next week on Wednesday, the 21st of October. That the conference will be an exciting and an important forum for us to engage with our member engineers, with engineering business leaders, with policymakers and others to discuss climate action and the leadership role that engineers have in addressing climate breakdown and helping communities to transition to a more resilient society. That we're delighted that we'll be joined on the event by Michael D. Higgins, President of Ireland and our guest of honour, by Minister Eamon Ryan, TD, who's Minister for Climate Action, Communications, Networks and Transport, by Dr. Morgan Bazilian, who's the former lead energy specialist at the World Bank, by Dr. Hayaton Salem, Chief Executive of the Royal Academy of Engineering, and many, many more interesting speakers. So if you go over to engineersireland.ie, you'll find out how to register for the conference. And on our website, you'll also find the links to the full State of Ireland 2020 report, and of course as well to our sustainability section that Conall mentioned. So thank you again everyone for attending today's launch, and I look forward to seeing you at the conference and at our future events. Thank you.